From the PSIA-AASI satellite studios in Hood River, Oregon, I'm George Thomas. You are listening to First Chair and love it. Back on with Pete Allison. How did I get so lucky? 2 weeks in a row, Pete.
Oh, I'm the lucky one, George. I'm the lucky one. I enjoy these conversations.
So, Pete, you're at Penn State. I have to start out with a question that it's been in my mind since I was a little kid and watched my first Penn State football game. What is a Nittany Lion?
Oh, well. Um, I just learned this about 10 years ago about Nittany lions. And so Nittany lions go
Oh, you
back
did? Okay.
apparently this goes back a long way in the history of Penn State. And early on, and I'll be I'm not going to try and give years because I'll get them wrong. But early on in the life of Penn State had a game against another university, and I'm not 100% sure what that university was. And that university had um, uh, a I don't know, what do you call it, a kind of motto, and it was something like a tiger or something like that, or
Oh, their
whatever.
mascot.
Their kind of mascot, yeah, was a tiger or was something like that. And Penn State at that time didn't have one, and so they decided they were going to create one. And so they created this Nittany lion, and I'm not sure where the name came from, but the story goes that I'm not sure if it was that same game or if it was a different game, but never let the truth get in the way of a good story. It was a game against it was a game against a university somewhere I think in the southeast. And I'm not absolutely sure about that. But somewhere in the southeast. You can tell I'm not really a American football fan, but this story I think is really good. And they had this game, and the opposing team said were the coaches got in touch and said, looking forward to the game. By the way, we don't expect you to have any African American players on the team, and I don't think that was a term that they used at the time, but that's the term I'm going to use today. They said we don't think it would be wise for you to bring any African American players to our campus for this game. And the coach, quick as could be, just said, no, we will be bringing whoever we'll be bringing on our team. We bring a team because we are Penn State, which of course is the Penn State chant. And that is the origin of the Penn State chant. And so they said, we bring all of our team, and that's how we play. And that's why they don't have names on the back of their shirts. Because they're all one team. And so it was kind of a stand up against racism. And to this day, the chant of Penn State is, we are Penn State, we are Penn State. And they don't have names on the back of their shirts. So that's kind of a long-winded way of saying that's the Nittany Lion story, but it's also, in my mind, a much more important political history statement and story as well, which I love. I think it's a great story of standing up for what's right, regardless.
Love that. And I never knew why Penn State had no names on the back of the jerseys. Thank you.
There you go. There you go.
Well, Pete, let's talk a little about snow sports.
Let's go for that. Yeah.
What a great story, though. Thank you very much. I think we're going to get into some academics here. And, we're at the beginning of the school year. What do you call this week? I don't really need to show up for class or anything because nothing's really happening anyway. So maybe we can see a change in that.
Yeah, great. So this is the first week of class, which was it last week or the week before, is typically known as curriculum week or as syllabus week. And so students often don't turn up to class because they think, okay, well, we know what's going to happen here. The instructor's going to come in, we're going to introduce ourselves, and they're going to talk us through the syllabus for the course, and we're going to be bored out of our brains. And that's basically all you miss in the first week of semester. And so there's been a move, and I don't know if maybe some of the listeners can relate to that. Maybe they experienced that syllabus week or curriculum week and how dull it was. And of course, you know, every faculty thinks their syllabus is just the most fascinating syllabus of all, but we forget that, you know, students go to all of their classes that week and they get the same thing basically in all of their classes, and I would say it's dull as dishwater. You know, it's not an interesting way to start a course or to get things kicked off. And so, you know, and it made, of course, it makes, because I think about snow sports way more than than anything else in my life, pretty much. You know, it makes me think about how do you start a snow sports course or a snow sports lesson or all those kind of things. And so we've been shifting that in academia to, instead of talking about the syllabus, talking about why does this course matter? Why is this course important in the world? How is this going to help you to contribute to a better world in some way or another? And that is, for most people, a much more interesting and engaging way of starting a course than in week 3, we're going to do this. And in week 4, we've got an assessment. And in week 5, we're going to do that, etc., etc. So that kind of idea, and it makes me think about a lot about how we start snow sports courses, classes, experiences, and how we hook people in, preferably in a quick and dirty kind of way, or in a speedy way, so that we can actually get moving. Because most people come because they want to move, they want to be in active rather than standing around talking on the snow.
And
And
Pete,
so
this sounds like it goes with class as well as going to an assessment.
exactly it applies in so many contexts in life, and I think that's kind of what's interesting. You know, if you're chairing a meeting, same thing applies, right? You want to kind of get in and get going, and you want to get people talking and onto the topics that are really important, and people want to feel like their time isn't being wasted. So one of the things that that I've started to do with classes, and I'm certainly not saying that this is the best way, and I'm certainly not saying this is the only way, but it works for me. One of the ways I've started to kick off my classes in the classroom is I ask students to write on a piece of paper things about classes that they've taken that they've loved. And that can be a class in primary school, secondary school, anywhere. It can be any kind of context, but what's been really good and what have been features of that class or that course that they've taken that they liked. And people say things like, oh, well, you know, I took this course and it was really clear that the person who was running it cared, or it was really fun because we got time to talk, or it was really good because they lectured and they really knew what they were talking about. All kinds of kind of responses. And I get students to write that down on a post-it, or if there's a whiteboard in the room, just write it straight on the whiteboard or the chalkboard or whatever it is, and put that on one side. And it's always interesting to see the themes that kind of come out of that. You know, if you've got 20 or 30 people in the room, you can kind of start to spot themes very quickly. And then I ask them to say, okay, think about the worst class you've ever taken, or the worst moment in a class that you've ever taken. What was it that made it terrible? What was it that really put you to sleep? And do the same thing. And they put that on the board. And that immediately tells me a ton about who's in the room, right? Straight away, I get this kind of insight. And then I ask everybody in the room to look at it. So I say, and this probably takes, I don't know, 20 minutes, half an hour. I say to them, look at what's written on there. Take a minute to look at it and see which comments are similar to your comments and which comments are really different to yours and really surprise you. in both sides of that. And then I say to them, okay, now I want you to think about what you can do in this class to make sure that you get more of the stuff that really interests you or engages you or that really gets you fired up. And I want you to think about what that looks like and how you can take responsibility for it. And that leads us into, of course, a conversation about this is about creating a learning environment that isn't all my responsibility as an instructor, as a professor, but this is about a learning environment that we all take responsibility for creating. And so whether that's asking good questions or whether it's listening, or whether it's respecting that other people might be interested in what's being talked about, even though it's not really floating your boat, that's okay. So it kind of opens up that conversation. And it seems to me that there's some pretty good connections there with snow sports that I know a lot of people do. And maybe actually, now I think about it, maybe some of where I learned that was actually in snow sports and I brought it into the university classroom. Maybe I'm not sure where that came from or which way around, but for me, it kind of works as an approach to get people talking and thinking about learning anything rather than the syllabus.
Sounds very instructive for the instructor as well. And I'm wondering, have you ever been surprised by something that came up on the what did you like least in a class where you're like, oh wow, I actually do that? No.
Every time, without
Every
there's
time.
always something that surprises me. Always something that and what I do is I take photos of it and then I use it as a check-in. So I use it, mid-semester. I kind of say, remember we did this on the first day, and I put the pictures up and they go, oh yeah. So okay, how we doing? What do you think? Where are we? One of the things that people often say is that they hate lessons that are, or courses, classes that have meaningless assessments. Or work that they would describe as busy work. Okay, we're doing this for the sake of doing it. It's not because it actually has any purpose, or we're doing this to fulfill some kind of bureaucratic system, which of course a lot of academic institutions are really good at doing that. So so it's something that has helped me to improve my teaching, and that's a lifelong project in itself. But it really helps me to improve my teaching by it gets people talking, gets them telling me what they like as ways of learning, and what are kind of triggers for them, if you like, things that they just turns them off of, oh, here we go again, I don't want to do that. Yeah.
Sounds like it could really keep us fresher as instructors as well, because into a long season, middle of the way through, a lot of times I know with myself, it's like, gosh, I feel like I'm teaching the same lesson over. And that's on me. It's like, you really need to be looking at this class and not just doing things by, well, this worked for the last class, so we're going to do it again with this group. And you really need to keep it fresh, not just for the group, but for yourself. And even though the group you're working with has maybe never heard what you're doing before, you can still spin it in a fresh way. So you're sounding very engaged and interested in what you're talking about.
Right. Which reminds me of it's a famous saying in teaching, is that that thing about students don't care what you know until they know that you care. And so, the idea that, okay, we've got to communicate somehow that we care about that individual and their learning before we worry about imparting wisdom on them or that kind of thing, and giving them the kind of standard talk, which I think is, especially later in the season, is easy to fall into that trap.
One of the things I tell my cessation groups is I take this very personally. I want you to succeed, and it matters to me. I know this is about you, but I'm putting a lot of my focus and everything into this program, and I want to see you reach your goals. And while I can't guarantee that this will work, yeah, I can guarantee you that I will be with you every step of the way through this. And that's really the way I feel about my snow sports classes. I want to see my students succeed. It matters. I want to see them out having fun. And I do think people feel that and realize that, and it's really important.
Yeah, and I think it's easy to assume that people think that or see that, but we don't necessarily communicate it explicitly, or whether people really pick up on that or not is another question. So I always think those things are worth saying. I want you to succeed. I want you to learn. And we can only do that if we all put the effort in. It requires all of us to be committed to that goal, especially over an extended period of time. If you've got lessons that are, every week for 3 hours, then you've got that kind of continuity, and it requires the commitment and the work and the effort to succeed.
What are you noticing in your classes in the snow sports instruction? Where do you see kind of the greatest opportunities for growth?
Well, there are so many. So let me back up. There's lots of different ways to answer this question, George, and it's easy to pick holes and have and identify problems. I always kind of joke that universities are full of people with PhDs in problems, but they're not very good with solutions. And so, I guess I'm of the view that PSIA have all kinds of strengths. There are a lot of things in PSIA that people do really well, whether that's because of PSIA or because of who they are, or because of the community, or the kind of whether that's the community of the whole association, or the community of the region, or the community of the snow sports school. There are all kinds of things that people do really, really well. And so I think one thing that we can benefit from is identifying those things and sharing them and celebrating them, and building on strengths. And one of the things that I see as, let's just say that I think it's mixed across the whole association, is this topic of feedback and feed forward. And depending on context and depending on preference and all that kind of thing, there are a whole range of different practices in there. And that's something that I think there is enormous potential to build on and to grow and to become better and better in that area. And when I talk about feedback and feed forward, I use those kind of terms synonymously because I actually see them as being so strongly connected that it's hard to talk about one without the other. But, I'm talking about everything from feedback in the moment in teaching to, on a day-to-day basis, through to feedback and feed forward in assessments, in clinics, and at the highest level, for example, let's just say national team selection, all the way through that kind of range. I think there's enormous potential for all of us upping our game. And it's not as if we're ever going to kind of reach a point where we finish that, where we say, great, we've got feedback and feed forward sorted out, tick, done, we can move on to something else now. It's not a problem with a solution. It's kind of a topic of, if you like, you could say that you could argue that it's the bedrock of what good snow sports education, good snow sports instruction looks like. And I think it also, interestingly, transcends the three categories, or it runs, if you like water, through the three categories of technical skills, teaching skills, and people skills. Because giving feedback and feed forward involves a combination of all of those things, right? It involves setting up, let's just say in a teaching context, setting up activities, and the activities that we choose to set up and ask people to do are related to our technical knowledge and our movement analysis and our technical understanding. But then they're also connected to our people skills and saying, okay, how do we express this to people in a way in which they can hear it and which they can act on it? And so I think that kind of topic of feedback and feed forward is such a hot topic. And I see that in the university as well, of, you know, people who give a grade and say, good job. And I'm sure we've all seen that kind of feedback, or maybe many people have received that kind of feedback. And then I see people who say, oh, here's a grade, and by the way, here are 3 pages of notes about what you could do better and what you did great, and that kind of thing. And so we see kind of all places on that spectrum.
Pete, I feel we have the topic of our next podcast set.
It might be next 1 or 2 or
2 or 3. You
I
want to give me some feedback on my cherry shirt?
love it. I've got shirt envy, George. You might see mine. You might have some envy of mine. This is a
I love it.
Angelo Roth design, which I absolutely love. I love the of the chairlift. So anyway, go on. Sorry.
I just anything you want to say in conclusion for our discussion for today?
Well, I mean, so many things. The most important conversation, of course, is the Nittany Lion. But you know, I think this kind of topic of feedback and feed forward is something that I'd encourage us all to think about. You know, I think there are kind of, going back to that activity that I was talking about that I do with students, maybe a question to listeners is to think about, okay, when have you received feedback and you've really liked it, feed forward, and you've really liked it, you've really heard it, it's really worked for you. And when have you received feedback and feed forward and it really hasn't worked, it's really fallen flat? Because most of us can identify those kind of times in some way or another. It doesn't have to be in a snow sports context, it can be in any context. And I think that can tell us a lot about our tendencies of how we give feedback, because we tend to teach the way we like to be taught, or feedback the way we like to receive feedback. And then think about, okay, how do we do a better job of that? How do we do it in such a way? You know, I know that if somebody gives me 3 pages of feedback, I'm unlikely to read it. It's too much, it's too dense. Unless it's from somebody who I hold in really, really high regard. But if somebody gives me half a page of feedback that's really carefully thought out, and it involves, here are things that you're doing really well, keep doing this. Here are things that you should really stop doing because they're really not helping you. And here are things that you should think about starting to do. I can kind of capture that, and I can hold that in my mind, and then I can go and work on it. And again, that's me. It's not everybody, but you know, thinking about that, and I think that kind of idea helps us with our people skills and expressing those ideas, and then thinking about how all of that fits with, you know, at different levels and through the system. You know, take an assessment feedback form. I would love to see people using that kind of traffic light approach, if you like, to feedback, so that candidates all receive some feedback and feed forward. This is where you did really well. This is where you really need to do some work, and this is stuff that you just stop doing. So, and we can talk more about it.
Absolutely. Pete Allison, thank you so much for your time. Always a pleasure chatting with you.
Pleasure's all mine. Thanks, George. Have a good rest of the Labor Day weekend.
From the PSIA-AASI Satellite Studios in Hood River, Oregon, I'm George Thomas.